Koomen, excited to be, there we go. Now I can hear myself. Excited to be with you this morning. If I haven't got the chance to meet you, I'd love the chance to do that more, take you for coffee. I'd like to hear your stories. So if that's something that you would find interesting, let me know. We've got new calendar events for Mosaic. We're into May next week, which is crazy already. You got to get in your Dutch costumes and go take the yearly tulip time pictures. But a few things to make note of. We've got a tech training coming up on Cinco de Mayo. Yeah, what up, Mayo? You all know what I mean. You don't need to shout at me. We've got a new soundboard in the back, and we'd love to get some people in this room trained on that specific soundboard. So if you are interested in that, if you've got an ear for sound, we'd love to get you trained up for that. Talk to me or Amy about that. And also one thing to make sure you for sure have on your calendar, Sunday, June 14, we're going to do a big ice cream social after the service with Mosaic, kind of like what we did last week. But instead of eating nutrition, we're just going to load ourselves with dairy and gluten. So join us for that. So make sure you can grab one of those and put those things on your calendar. With that said, we're jumping right in. We're in the third week on our series. We've started a few weeks ago on the character of God and looking at who God says He is. And the first week, what we did is we really staged this problem that we have an issue with God. And that issue is everyone seems to have a different view on God, who know God to be different. And they may not really have the problem with God Himself, but we find that in people who are different than us, people who vote differently than us, people who make decisions differently than us, they're making their decisions on this same God of the universe that we all follow, that we all worship, and yet we're making different decisions, right? So how can that be? We have arguments with friends, we have arguments with family, we have arguments with coworkers on, well, my God, the God we serve, I'm sure would view things in this way. I think it all comes down to, and we talked about this a few weeks ago, is this issue that we have all created a different God. God has made us in His image, and in turn, we've made Him into ours. And so what comes with that is our views get put on God. And of course, God would agree with us in all of those things. And so with that, we come up with this issue of when we're looking to listen for God, when we want His guidance in things in our life, when we want His direction and we truly want to listen for Him, I think we have a hard time figuring out what is God's voice, right? Is God actually saying these things? Is God actually want us to move in this direction? I think it's an issue because we don't know what's our own voice in God's voice, right? Or what's actually God saying, go forward with these things, because we've made God in our image. And this point of this series is to truly just break that down, to deconstruct what we have created God to be in a sense, and re-look at what did God actually say He was? What does God say He is? And build it back based on that. Then and only then will we be able to listen for the voice of God with some understanding to who He is and what we should actually be listening for. The verse that we're in for the course of this series is from Exodus 34, and it says this: the Lord, the compassionate, the gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And this week we're looking at the gracious God in this section. What does being gracious mean? And for this whole series, we're asking some very similar questions from each teaching, from each characteristic of God that He names. And they're this: how do we listen better for the voice of God? How do we know what is Him? How do we know that those are actually Him? And what do we do with that? Once we know these things, how do we respond to these characteristics of God? So we'll be doing that again today, so be listening for some of those things. But last week, in order to better understand this compassionate God that we started looking at, we got into some weeds on the original language and the Hebrew of it. And we're going to, and from that, we took the Hebrew word and then, okay, where else does this come out in Scripture? Where else do we see this word played out that may better describe what God is trying to get across in that? And we are going to attempt to do something very similar today. So the first thing is looking at the original language. In Exodus 34, the word that is described as gracious when we're looking at God is, let's see here, chanun. And I know there's some roll of the tongue there, but I guess I'd just hit you guys there with some spit. So if you're fine with it, right? So chanun is the word that we translate in English as gracious. He is a gracious God. And it's got this root word, chanain, that really means, signifies this God's free, unmerited gift. The unmerited of goodness and love and favor that is extended to the people that may not deserve those things. But where do we see this word come up? Where else do we see it throughout the Old Testament especially? We've got to take a little bit of a journey to get there. So we're going to be jumping around quite a bit. We're going to take 3 biblical steps in order to better understand what this word means, what gracious actually means. So in order to understand Exodus 34, which we hear about God being gracious, we're going to jump back to Genesis 33. But to understand that story, we've got to actually jump a little bit further back to Genesis 27. So we're going to be all over this morning. So if you haven't had your coffee, it's time to refill because we've got to focus through all this morning. But first, a family map. This is, if we look at this map here on the top, it's the genealogy of Abraham. Often, I think 2 weeks ago when we started this series, we talked that God often introduces himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's the patriarchs of the faith. When he introduces himself to Moses, when he explains who he is, he'll use the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in that to signify to the people like, I'm the God of your forefathers. I'm the God that they could trust, so you can trust me. And we'll be in this story looking specifically at Isaac. Isaac is right underneath the yellow Sarah there. So Abraham and Sarah have a son named Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah, who is in the pink. And then Isaac and Rebekah have 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. And that is going to be our primary people that we're focused on in this story today. And I'd encourage you, if you've got time this week, look closer at this story with these different characters. Fascinating through Genesis 27 through about 33. But we're gonna briefly buzz over some of the highlights in here. Now, Rebekah. So Rebekah is married to Isaac. Rebekah has a favorite out of her 2 sons. Parents, don't look at your kids right now, but we all have favorites, don't we? Right? We've got kids who we enjoy more than others. I'm thinking about creating a board in my house so the kids know exactly where they rank, right? Like, Brindley's often towards the top because she's the baby, and for some reason she can do no wrong in our eyes, right? But last night she woke up at 2 a.m., and I want her to see she's gone down in the ranking, right? Like, for them to strive to be better. I don't know if that works or not. I haven't seen it done. I'll write a parenting book if it works. But we all have our favorites in a sense, right? And Rebekah's no different. Rebekah has a favorite. She loves Jacob. She loves her son Jacob. She spends a lot of time with her son Jacob, and she wants the best for him. Now, in the story where we're picking up, Rebekah's husband, Isaac, is starting to get old. He is getting well along in years. It's a term for wisdom back in that day. Getting well along in years. And she overhears a conversation between Isaac and Esau. So Esau is the firstborn. And there's a conversation between Isaac, her husband, and Esau, her second favorite son. And Isaac is explaining to Esau that I'm starting to get old. We don't know how many days I have left. So son, will you go make me my favorite meal? Right? Go out and kill the finest animal you can find and cook it up in the way that I like. And then I want to bless you. I want to give you your birthright. I want to do these things for you. So they have this conversation, and it's the big conversation. This is prepping the stage for us. It'd be the inheritance, to be gifted, and in that day and age, the birthright would mean it was a double portion. For us, inheritance often gets split up between all of the kids, but for them, the being the firstborn mattered. Being the firstborn mattered because there is a double portion that goes to them. I'm going to try and explain that to my parents when they start getting well along in years, that a double portion should go to the firstborn. I think biblically that makes sense. We'll see. But Esau would be excited about this, right? He knows that he is about to take on the spiritual headship of the family, like being the firstborn mattered to them. So Esau takes off into the woods and goes to prepare a wild game. He's known for the woods, and this was a big deal for them. Now, Rebekah hears all of this, and she's looking at the younger son, the favorite of hers, and she decides, I would rather Jacob get this inheritance. I would rather Jacob get this birthright, this blessing. And so Jacob and Rebekah devise a plan where Jacob will pretend to be Esau and go in and get the blessing while Esau is running off trying to get this meal prepared. But Jacob sees a problem. Right? Esau is the hunter of the family. He has the smell of the woods. Right? Has that smell of the pine and like old leather, like the kind of smells that they make soap bars out of today, so people like me who work in an office can smell like a real man. Right? That is the smell that Esau has. So and Jacob understands that if he were to walk in the tent of his dad would know right away, wait a minute here, that's not my son. So much so that they end up putting a sheep and goat skin on his arms so that if his dad would reach out and touch him, he would feel the coarse skin of the goat and think, of course, this must be Esau. So Jacob does all of these things, and he goes in and convinces his father that he is in fact Esau. And he gets the birthright and the blessing that did not belong to him. Shortly after this, Esau comes back, and you can imagine he's been excited. He's been hunting. He's got the prize game, and he's prepared it up in the way his father likes, like almost giddy, right? You can imagine him just knowing what is coming, and he walks into his father's tent with this meal, and he sets it at his father's feet, and he says, "I'm here, Dad." And his dad looks at him and tries to understand, what do you mean you're here? We just had this moment. We just did this. Esau goes, what? Yeah, no, we just had this moment. I just gave the blessing to you. And Esau realizes he's been tricked. Or he's been off doing his own thing, and somebody has come in and stole this. And they both realize quite quickly, it's Jacob. And because that birthright has been given, it can no longer be given. It can't just be taken back. The word was set on Jacob. It could no longer be given to Esau. You can imagine. Esau is ticked. He's fuming. It's the kind of thing where steam is pouring out of his ears. And he is mad. And we see at the end of the story, it says this, out of chapter 27 ends with these words. Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. He said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. When Rebekah was told what her older son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, your brother Esau is planning to avenge himself by killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran. So, You can see this story play out. You can see the divisiveness of this family. You can see the brother and brother tension. They're like true hatred to the point of, I'm going to kill you for this. And we find at the end of this story, Jacob flees to the uncle. It'd be the brother of Rebekah. If we could pull up that map here a moment and get an idea. This map is something we use quite frequently, especially when we're in the series on Matthew. It's really the same map. The people of God haven't gone around that much. So the bottom area here, you can see some of the blue dots. Galilee is one of those top ones where Jesus did a lot of his ministry. So this is the same nation. We're in that. Now, when Jacob does this, he flees off. If you follow that red line all the way to the top, is Haran, where the uncle is residing at. So Jacob heads off and he just hightails it out, and that is where he lands for about 20 years. And during this time, Jacob works for the uncle, and there's some wild stories in there that we don't have time to get into today. But he starts to amass some flocks, some sheep, some cattle. He gets some wives. Yes, it was plural. One of the interesting stories. Children are coming along at this point. So 20 years, he's starting to gather almost his own family, his own group, his own amount of stuff. And at this point, God tells him something. In Genesis 31, verse 13, it says this, I am the God of Bethel. Now, God says this, I'm the God of Bethel, because God had already proven himself to Jacob at this location. So what God is saying in this, he's saying, remember, I was faithful in Bethel. I am that God. I am the same one. I have not changed. I'm the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now, leave this land at once and go back to your native land. If you're Jacob, and you're starting to really put roots down, really, in Haran, the words, now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. What's in the native land? Right? You could almost feel Jacob swallowing, like, what? But isn't Esau still there? Or like, there's no way I can go back. But he knows God has told him this, so Jacob prepares to head back home to a land where he doesn't have any idea if he's welcomed or not. He doesn't have any clue if over the course of these 20 years, if Esau has been getting madder and madder, just waiting and scheming for the right opportunity to kill Jacob. Or you can imagine he stole something that would have been incredibly important in Esau's life. Right? It's generational wealth. It's generational blessing, the birthright. You can't tell me that over the course of the last 20 years, when Jacob lays his head down at night, that he isn't wondering when there's a creak or a crack outside of his tent, is it Esau? Has Esau found me? Right, for 20 years, you can imagine. I don't think he forgot about Esau. He knew what he did. Right, this has to be part of his conversations at night. And we jump into the story then, Genesis 32, and this is going to be our main section of Scripture this morning. Starting in verse 3. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him, so they're traveling towards their home. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, this is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Right, you can already hear it in his voice, my lord, like he's already like groveling at the feet of Esau. Your servant, Jacob, says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now, I am sending this message to my Lord that I may find favor in your eyes. You get a sense of how this is written, right? He's really saying, I have all of these things now. Like I'm coming back home. Is that okay? Like I'm your servant, my Lord. Like I'm just coming back home. Verse 6. When the messengers gave that message, returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he's coming to meet you. and 400 men are with him. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the other group that is left may escape. Jumping ahead a little bit farther, verse 13. He spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." He instructed the one in the lead, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks, 'Who do you belong to? And where are you going? And who owns all these animals in front of you?' Then you are to say, 'They belong to your servant Jacob. They're a gift sent to you, my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us.'" Or you can almost see Jacob is being pretty brilliant in the way he's spacing things out. Like, send the gifts out front, send the cattle. And if we hear the slaughter, right, if that gives some space in between each one that maybe they can get back. Maybe we all start hightailing out, that we hear the stampede of running in the different spaces. Maybe we don't all die out of this. It continues. Verse 19. He also instructed the second, the third, and all the others who followed the herds, "You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say," be clear, "Your servant Jacob is coming behind us, for he thought, 'I will pacify him with these gifts, and I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me.'" So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. Or not only does he stagger him out, he's putting one night's stay behind him. Right? He is putting plenty of gap, like, I think I'm going to die, but if there's any chance that he's going to show mercy, if there's any chance he's going to run after me, I want some space here. Jumping ahead to chapter 33, verse 1. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and their children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. That's an interesting thing. We don't have time to spend on that, but sending the women and children out front. Good luck, right? He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. You can imagine some space also he's bowing down, still with some space out there. But he realizes as he's bowing down, if you're Jacob, you're listening. All right, you're listening for that sword to be drawn from Esau's belt, and you're preparing for the worst. Or preparing for that sword to kill you, because the reality is he deserves it. He deserves to be killed for what he's done. And Esau has said very clearly, "I'm going to kill you." Continues verse 4. But Esau, he ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck, and he kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children. "Who are these with you?" he asked. Jacob answered, "They are the children God has graciously given your servant." Still this language of, I'm lower than you. The birthright would say he is higher. Jacob should be higher just because of the birthright and the blessing. And yet he's coming in lowly as your servant. Verse 6. Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed. Next, Leah and their children came and bowed down. Last of all came Joseph and Rachel, and they too bowed down. Esau asked, "What's the meaning of all these flocks and herds that I met?" "I find favor in your eyes, my lord." To find favor in your eyes, my lord, he said. But Esau said, "I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." "No, please," said Jacob, "if I found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept this present that that was brought to you, for God has given graciously to me. I have all that I need." And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, "Let us be on our way. I'll accompany you." Quite an unexpected ending. Not what you would think for where this story started and what was taking place in the beginning. And I would argue it's primarily the story of grace. This same word chen appears a few times in this story. Once in verse 8, when Jacob is talking to his brother, saying, "If I find favor in the sight of my Lord, if I find grace in the sight, if I find chen in the sight of my Lord." Also again in verse 10, "If I had found chen in your eyes." And again in verse 15, "Let me find chen in the sight of my Lord." He's asking for this chen, this grace, and Esau gives it to him. Even though he should be killed, the sword should be Esau's response, but he is completely met with grace. Right? This story and this idea of grace is truly beautiful. And I think it paints this perfect picture and this perfect understanding of what grace truly is, and the grace that we received from God. So when God tells us that He is a gracious God, when He tells us that He's a chen God, what is He actually telling us? It means that He is giving us something that we do not deserve. There's nothing we deserve about it. Much like Jacob, we deserve the worst. Or we deserve what we have coming to us. We deserve death because we lie. We cheat, we steal, we put our own needs above others, very similar to what Jacob did in the beginning of the story. We sin, and because of that sin, we should be separated from God. God and sin do not coincide. Because we are sinful by nature, we should be separated from God. Death should be the response to us, and yet God responds with something drastically different. God responds to us with grace. And He did this by sending His one and only Son on the cross to die for our sins. We did not deserve that. See, Romans 8 tells us this: "He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will we not also, along with Him, graciously give us all things?" See, God is gracious. So let's bring us back to the questions for this series. How do we listen better for the voice of God? How do we do that? When we think about this understanding and this concept of grace, how do we better listen for the voice of God? Personally, for me, one thing that's helpful in understanding this is understanding my relationship with God. That helps me figure out what grace looks like and how that feels. Because I think a piece of that is having the knowledge of who we are and whose we are. And then what relation to that we are. There's a verse from 1 John in the New Testament, 1 John 3, verse 1 says, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God." And that is what we are. So we are children of God. You are a child of God. And because of that, that should change our view on grace and the grace that God offers for us. God isn't this distant thing out there. God isn't far away from us. And sometimes we have this view that God is so big and distant because He's worried about all the things of this world. Why would He worry about us? For me, when I think about grace, I have to get my mindset on being a child of God, because all of a sudden that faraway God that seems so unreachable, when He becomes Father, it changes. Right? All of a sudden, it's way more intimate in that. That's why in the benediction, when we close out the service every week, you'll hear the words, "And let Him, when He lifts up His face towards you and give you peace." There's a unique translation there that says, God is lifting up His face towards us. which for me, first never made sense because, and I've taught a little bit on this before, but for me never made sense because we're not, in my head, taller than God. Right? So why would God lift up his face towards us? If you've got kids or have ever seen a child that has been caught doing something wrong and they know it, right? There's a shame that kids have that they carry. And when they know it, their head goes down. And then even if you get down on their level, like their chin is touching like you can't even, you try to get underneath them a little bit, right? And there comes a point when, as a dad, you just want to make eye contact with your child, right? So as a dad, what you have to do next is literally lift up your kid so that they're above you, that they can see nothing but your face. They can see nothing but your eyes. And in that moment, you can translate with the kid of, it's okay. You may carry this shame. You may feel this heartache. You may realize the sin you've committed, but I've got you. I understand. I don't think anything less of you. There's that grace that can be offered when God lifts up his face towards you and gives you that peace. See, when we understand that we are children of God, regardless of what we've done, regardless of the shame we carry, he is still offering that grace for us. Second question is this: how do we know what is him? If we realize we're children of God, that's good, but how do we know what his voice is? How do we know when it's him telling us something and not ourselves in the voice of something, or even worse, Satan trying to sound like God and saying some good things, but how do we know what is God's voice, especially when we think about what is grace? Question is this: is the voice you are hearing gracious? Is it gracious? I want to be clear here, and we'll get into this in the coming weeks when we look at this, but we do not serve a God who is gracious to the extent of being tolerant of all things, okay? We'll get into that more next week when we look at God being slow to anger. It doesn't mean that there is an anger, and it doesn't mean that we don't serve a just God. But there's graciousness in this, and we'll continue to talk about that, so I don't want to get into it much now. But we serve a God who is gracious, but that doesn't mean he doesn't get angry. Graciousness does not mean God is absent of justice, but God is full of grace. See, look at our story. When we think about Jacob, all the things he brought in order to appease his brother, to try and make his brother happy before Jacob comes on the scene, to hopefully find this this favor in his eyes. Esau explains, what are you doing? What's all this stuff? Like, I don't need all of this stuff. I'm not looking for all of this stuff. Esau just went directly to him, and they hug and they weep and they embrace. And I picture God in a similar way. Right? The grace is there. There's no need to bring anything. There's no need to make yourselves pretty before you run and approach God. We don't have to clean ourselves up. We don't have to do 10 good Christian tasks before we pray to God. You know the voice of God when you hear someone who is offering that grace without stipulation, without saying, yeah, but if you could bring some of these things, that would be best. Or if you could do some of these things, that would be good. Or saying, how dare you ask for this when you've done all of these things? Right? The words of God following, understanding that he's a gracious God should be, I love you, from God. Or, you are my child. Or, there's nothing that you could do that would stop me from loving you. Right? You know what words won't be there? The words that won't be running around in your head? I knew you would do this again. Those words are not from God. Those words don't come from a gracious God. Or, I knew you weren't good enough.